Blood pooled on the checkered linoleum of the diner, stark, thick, and terrifying. A man feared across the entire eastern seaboard, a phantom of the city's criminal underworld, was bleeding to death under flickering fluorescent lights, and not a single customer moved. They simply froze in abject terror. It wasn't until Harper, a minimum-wage waitress with a past she kept ruthlessly buried, threw herself onto the floor and kneeled directly between his sprawling legs that the paralyzed silence broke. She wasn't begging for her life. She was digging her bare hands into a ruptured femoral artery to stop the bleeding. But what she slipped out of his inner coat pocket during those frantic, blood-soaked seconds was a secret that would shock the entire city and bind their fates together forever. The rain was coming down in sheets, hammering against the large, grease-stained windows of the Rusty Anchor diner. It was 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of graveyard shift where the minutes stretched into hours, and the only company was the rhythmic dripping of a leaky ceiling tile and the hum of the ancient neon sign outside. Harper Quinlan stood behind the counter, a damp rag in her hand, wiping down the same spot of formica for the third time. She was 26, running on 4 hours of sleep and a dangerous amount of black coffee. The diner was sparsely populated. In the corner booth sat 2 weary long-haul truckers, nursing lukewarm mugs. 2 stools down from the register, a regular named Gary was meticulously dissecting a slice of cherry pie. It was a picture of mundane, nocturnal urban life. Until the front door blew open. It didn't just open, it crashed against the bell with such violent force that the glass spiderwebbed. The wind howled into the diner, bringing with it a man who looked like he had just walked out of a nightmare. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that probably cost more than Harper made in 3 years. But the suit was ruined. It was soaked with rain and saturated with a dark, heavy liquid that looked black under the dim streetlights, but gleamed a sickening crimson under the diner's overhead bulbs. He took 1 staggering step inside, then another. Harper dropped her rag. The truckers in the corner booth stopped talking. Gary slowly lowered his fork. The air in the diner evaporated, replaced by a sudden, suffocating dread. Harper knew who he was. Anyone who watched the local news or grew up in the South Side knew his face, even if they had never seen him in person. Dante Castiglione, the undisputed head of the Castiglione family, a syndicate that had a stranglehold on the city's shipping ports, underground casinos, and political infrastructure. He was a man who traded in fear, a ghost who orchestrated empires from the shadows, and right now, the ghost was dying. Dante clutched his lower abdomen, his fingers stained dark. But the real danger was lower. A massive, horrifying tear ripped through the fabric of his suit trousers, high up on his right thigh. Blood wasn't just leaking, it was pulsing, spilling in rhythmic, terrifying spurts onto the checkerboard floor. He looked up, his dark eyes cloudy with pain and blood loss, but still possessing a terrifying, feral sharpness. He didn't ask for help. He didn't scream. He simply swayed, a magnificent structure finally giving way to gravity. With a heavy, sickening thud, Dante Castiglione collapsed onto his back in the middle of the aisle. "Hey," Gary whispered, his voice trembling as he backed away from the counter, his hands raised, as if the dying man might suddenly leap up and shoot him. "Hey, we gotta get out of here." "Don't touch him," one of the truckers hissed, scrambling out of the booth and throwing a crumpled $20 bill on the table. "You know who that is? You get his blood on you, his people will kill you just for being there. The guys who shot him will kill you for helping him. We're gone." Panic, raw and infectious, swept through the diner. The 3 men didn't even look back. They scrambled for the exit, slipping on the wet floor, pushing past the bleeding Mafia boss as if he were a live bomb, and bolted out into the torrential rain. Harper was left entirely alone. She stood paralyzed behind the counter. The survival instinct ingrained in her screamed to follow them, run out the back door, down the alley, and never look back. Dante Castiglione was a dangerous man, and the violence that had brought him to his knees was undoubtedly following him. But Harper looked at the floor. The pool of blood was spreading rapidly, creeping toward the base of the counter. It was a femoral artery bleed. If she had learned anything from her 3 grueling, unfinished years in nursing school, before her mother's medical bills had forced her to drop out and sling hash, it was that a ruptured femoral artery meant the human body had roughly 3 to 5 minutes before total exsanguination. He was bleeding to death, right now, on her freshly mopped floor. "Damn it," Harper breathed. She slammed her hand down on the emergency lock under the counter, bolting the front door shut. Then she vaulted over the counter, completely abandoning her survival instincts, and sprinted toward the dying king of the city. Harper hit the linoleum hard, dropping to her knees, sliding the last 2 feet in the slick pool of Dante's blood. The metallic, copper scent of it filled her nostrils, overwhelming the smell of old grease and stale coffee. Dante was barely conscious. His chest heaved erratically. His skin, usually a tanned olive, was the color of wet ash. "Hey, look at me!" Harper yelled, her voice echoing in the empty diner. She grabbed his shoulders and shook him. His eyes fluttered open, rolling slightly before locking onto hers. Even on the edge of death, there was a cold, calculating weight behind his stare. "Artery," he rasped, his voice a gravelly whisper. "I know," Harper said, her mind snapping into a cold, clinical focus she hadn't felt in years. "I need to put pressure on it. It's high up." The wound was dangerously close to his groin. To get the necessary leverage and body weight required to compress the femoral artery against the bone, Harper had to maneuver herself directly over him. Without a second thought for modesty or the bizarre optics of the situation, she swung her legs over, kneeling firmly on the floor between his sprawling legs, positioning her upper body directly over his right hip. She placed the heel of her right hand directly into the torn fabric and the pulsing wound beneath it, slapping her left hand over the right, and pushed down with every ounce of her body weight. Dante let out a guttural, choked roar of agony. Suddenly, a cold, hard cylinder pressed against Harper's temple. She froze. She didn't need to look to know what it was. Dante, with his remaining strength, had drawn a customized compact 9mm pistol from a shoulder holster and was pressing the barrel directly against her skull. His hand was shaking violently from shock, but his finger was firmly on the trigger. "No! Cops!" he choked out, blood bubbling at the corner of his lips. "No! Hospitals!" Harper kept her hands locked on his wound, not easing the pressure by a single fraction of an ounce. She looked down into his face, feeling the cold steel against her skin. She was terrified, but the adrenaline overrode the fear. "If you shoot me," Harper said, her voice eerily calm, "I fall over. The pressure stops. You bleed out in exactly 90 seconds, so put the damn gun down." Dante stared at her, his eyes searching hers for a bluff. He found none. Slowly his arm fell, the gun clattering onto the bloody linoleum. "Who are you?" he slurred, his eyelids drooping. "I'm the waitress trying to save your miserable life," Harper shot back. "I need a tourniquet. You got a belt?" "Suspenders," he mumbled. "Useless." Harper scanned the room frantically. She needed something strong. Her eyes landed on her own waist. She was wearing a thick, heavy-duty leather apron tie. With one hand maintaining absolute pressure on his wound, she used her teeth and her free hand to yank the thick leather strap loose from her waist. "This is going to hurt," she warned him. She slid the leather strap high up his thigh, just above the wound, looping it through itself. But she needed a windlass to tighten it. She grabbed the heavy metal handle of a broken ice scoop resting on the bottom shelf of the nearby counter, slid it under the leather strap, and began to twist. Dante's jaw locked. His body seized under her as the leather bit brutally into his flesh, cutting off the blood flow to the lower half of his leg. Harper twisted it twice, 3 times, until the awful pulsing beneath her hands finally slowed to a weak seep. She secured the metal handle against his leg, tying it off with the remaining leather. She slumped back on her heels, still kneeling between his legs, gasping for air. Her hands, her apron, her jeans were soaked in his blood. Dante's head lolled to the side. He was passing out. But before his eyes closed completely, he reached up with a blood-slicked hand and weakly grabbed the collar of her shirt. "Inside. Pocket," he whispered urgently. "Take it. Hide it. If Roman gets it, my family burns." "Who is Roman? What are you talking about?" Harper asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Take it," he demanded, his grip weakening. "Trust no one." Dante's hand fell away. His eyes rolled back, and he lost consciousness. Harper stared at his unmoving face. She reached a trembling hand into the inner breast pocket of his ruined suit jacket. Her fingers brushed against cold metal. She pulled it out. It was a heavy, platinum money clip, but there was no cash in it. Instead, clamped tightly inside the metal, was a micro SD card and a torn piece of a photograph. Harper flipped the photograph over. Her breath hitched in her throat. The world seemed to stop spinning. The torn photo was of a young woman, smiling warmly. It was a picture Harper had kept on her own nightstand for the last 5 years. It was a picture of her younger sister, Lily. Lily, who had died in a supposed hit-and-run accident 3 years ago. An accident the police had never solved. Why did the head of the Castiglione Mafia family have a picture of her dead sister hidden next to his heart? Before Harper could even begin to process the shock, the low, powerful rumble of engines vibrated through the diner's floorboards. Through the cracked glass of the front door, Harper saw 2 black SUVs slide to a halt in the rain-swept parking lot. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the diner. 4 men stepped out into the storm. They weren't cops. Cops didn't wear long black trench coats, and cops didn't carry suppressed submachine guns openly in the street. These were the cleaners. Whoever had shot Dante Castiglione had come to make sure the job was finished. Harper had exactly 30 seconds. The shock of seeing Lily's photo instantly converted into pure, unadulterated survival instinct. She shoved the platinum clip and the photo deep into her bra, against her skin. She looked at Dante's massive, unconscious frame. She couldn't fight 4 armed hitmen, and she couldn't leave him out in the open. If they found him, they'd put a bullet in his head, and then they'd put one in hers for being a witness. "Get up," she hissed, though she knew he couldn't hear her. She grabbed him under the armpits. He was dead weight, easily 200 pounds of solid muscle. Gritting her teeth, Harper used her legs, leveraging all the strength she possessed, and dragged him backward. His expensive shoes dragged through his own blood, leaving a horrifying, wide smear across the linoleum. She dragged him behind the main counter, pulling him toward the back swinging doors that led to the kitchen and the pantry. Her muscles burned, her lungs screaming for oxygen. She kicked the swinging door open, hauled him over the threshold, and dragged him into the cramped, dark, dry storage pantry. She propped him up against a stack of flour sacks, ensuring his wounded leg remained elevated. In the dark, she pressed 2 fingers to his neck. A pulse. Weak, thready, but there. "Don't die on me," she whispered to the shadows. "You owe me an explanation." The bell above the front door jingled violently. Harper froze, They had shot the lock off. She backed out of the pantry, softly pulling the door shut behind her. She was now in the main kitchen, separated from the front diner by a narrow hallway and the swinging doors. "Clear the front," a deep, gravelly voice echoed from the diner. "Blood trail," another voice replied. "Massive, he's here. He didn't walk out of this." Harper looked down at herself. She looked like a butcher. If they saw her like this, the game was over. She frantically stripped off her blood-soaked apron and shoved it into the commercial trash can, covering it with coffee grounds. She washed her hands in the industrial sink, scrubbing the red from her skin with scalding water and steel wool in frantic silence. She splashed water on her face, grabbed a clean apron from the hook and tied it around her waist. It was a pathetic disguise, but it was all she had. She pushed through the swinging doors, stepping back into the diner just as two men rounded the counter, their weapons raised. Harper let out a perfectly timed, terrified scream, dropping a stack of plastic menus she had grabbed on her way out. The men instantly trained their guns on her. "Whoa! Whoa! Don't shoot! Please!" Harper cried, throwing her hands in the air, shrinking back against the wall. She forced tears into her eyes, leaning into the role of the traumatized, minimum-wage worker. The man in the lead, a tall, gaunt figure with a scar slicing through his left eyebrow, lowered his weapon slightly, though his eyes remained dead and suspicious. "Where is he?" the man demanded, his voice devoid of emotion. "Who? The guy who was just here," Harper stammered, pointing a shaky finger toward the front door. He came in. He was bleeding everywhere. It was horrible." "We know he was here," the second man snarled, stepping closer, his boots squelching in Dante's blood. "The trail goes behind the counter. Where did he go, sweetheart?" "He didn't stay," Harper lied, her voice cracking with manufactured panic. "He fell over, and then he heard sirens. Or he thought he did. He got up. I don't know how. He was bleeding so much. And he stumbled out the back emergency exit. The alarm is broken. It didn't sound. He went into the alley." The gaunt man stared at her, his dark eyes analyzing every millimeter of her face. Harper held her breath, praying the dim lighting hid the faint pink stains still lingering on her cuticles. "Check the back," the gaunt man ordered the other. The second man pushed past Harper, shoving through the swinging doors into the kitchen. Harper's heart stopped. The pantry was in the kitchen. If the hitman opened that door— "You," the gaunt man said, stepping closer to Harper, invading her personal space. He smelled like wet wool and gunpowder. "You didn't see a car pick him up? You didn't see which way down the alley he went?" "No," Harper whimpered, shaking her head. "I was hiding under the register. I swear, I didn't see anything. Please just take whatever is in the till and go." "We don't want your loose change, waitress," he sneered. From the kitchen, the second man's voice called out. "Back door is unlatched. Blood on the handle. Trail heads north down the alley." Harper exhaled a breath she didn't know she was holding. She had unlatched the back door when she threw out the trash 3 hours ago, and Dante's blood was likely on her hands when she pushed the swinging doors, leaving a trace that the hitmen misinterpreted. The gaunt man backed away from her. "If you call the cops," he said, leveling the suppressed barrel at her chest, "we come back, and we won't be asking questions." "I won't call anyone. I didn't see anything," Harper cried. The two men turned and swiftly exited the diner, melting back into the stormy night. The SUVs roared to life, their tires screeching against the wet pavement as they sped off toward the northern end of the alley. Harper stood rooted to the spot for a full minute, ensuring they were truly gone. Only when the taillights faded into the rain did she let her arms drop. Her knees buckled, and she slumped against the counter, gasping for air. She had just lied to a Mafia hit squad. She was harboring the boss of the most dangerous crime family in the city, and she was holding a piece of evidence that directly linked him to her dead sister. Harper pushed herself off the counter. The fear was gone now, replaced by a cold, burning need for answers. She walked back into the kitchen, pulled open the pantry door, and looked down at the unconscious Mafia boss. "You're going to live, Castiglione," Harper whispered, her eyes hardening as she felt the metal clip pressing against her skin. "Because you have a lot of explaining to do." The air inside the dry storage pantry was thick with the scent of raw onions, damp cardboard, and the metallic tang of Dante Castiglione's blood. The single overhead bulb flickered, casting long, erratic shadows across the small, windowless room. Harper knelt on the cold concrete floor, her breathing ragged, staring at the man who effectively owned the city's underworld. Dante's head was tipped back against a 50-pound sack of flour, his face a mask of pallid, waxen grey. The improvised leather tourniquet had stopped the catastrophic arterial spurting, but the wound was still weeping sluggishly. He needed a hospital. He needed synthetic plasma, a vascular surgeon, and a sterile operating theatre. What he had was a 26-year-old diner waitress and a plastic first aid kit designed for minor burn cream and band-aids. "Hey!" Harper slapped his cheek, her palm leaving a faint red smear on his skin. "Hey, Castiglione! Wake up! You can't die in my pantry! The health inspector will have a field day." Dante groaned, a deep, rattling sound that vibrated in his chest. His heavy eyelids fluttered, struggling against the crushing weight of hypovolemic shock. When his eyes finally focused, the haze of pain receded just enough to reveal that terrifying, predatory intelligence that had kept him alive in a ruthless syndicate. "You," he rasped, his throat dry. "The hit squad, Navarino's men." "Gone," Harper said, curtly. "I sent them down the north alley. They're tracking a ghost. But they aren't stupid. Once they realize the blood trail ends at a chain-link fence, they'll come back to the rusty anchor. We have maybe 20 minutes. Dante shifted, immediately letting out a sharp hiss of agony as the movement pulled at his torn femoral artery. His right hand instinctively went to his inner suit pocket. His fingers brushed against empty, blood-soaked fabric. The shift in his demeanor was instantaneous and chilling. The weak, dying man vanished, replaced by the apex predator of the eastern seaboard. Despite his condition, he lunged forward with frightening speed, his large, blood-stained hand gripping Harper's wrist like an iron vice. "Where is it?" he demanded, his voice dropping an octave, losing its slur. "The clip! Give it to me!" Harper didn't flinch. She had spent the last 3 years navigating grief, poverty, and the crushing weight of her mother's medical debt. She was entirely out of fear. She used her free hand to reach into the neckline of her shirt, pulling out the heavy platinum money clip. Dante reached for it, but Harper snatched her hand back, holding it just out of his reach. "Not yet," she said, her voice dropping into a dangerous, icy register. She unclipped the metal, letting the micro SD card fall into her palm, and then she held up the torn photograph. "You are going to tell me exactly why the head of the Castiglione family is carrying a picture of my dead sister next to his heart." Dante's dark eyes locked onto the photograph. For a fraction of a second, the hardened Mafia boss looked genuinely haunted. The rigid lines of his face softened, betraying an exhaustion that went far deeper than his physical wounds. "Lily," he whispered, the name carrying a heavy, mournful weight in the cramped pantry. Harper's breath hitched. Hearing him say her sister's name felt like a physical blow. "You knew her." "How did you know her?" "The police said it was a random hit-and-run on Blackwood Avenue, a drunk driver who fled the scene." "There are no random accidents in this city, Harper," Dante said, his voice straining. He let go of her wrist, leaning heavily back against the flour sacks. Harper froze. You know my name." "I know everything about you," Dante replied, his breathing growing shallow again. "I know you dropped out of the Penn State nursing program 3 years ago, when your mother was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I know you work double shifts at this diner and pick up weekend shifts at the laundromat on 5th Street to pay off the $200,000 in medical debt she left behind. And I know that you have spent every Sunday for the last 3 years putting white carnations on an empty grave." "Empty?" Harper whispered, the word barely escaping her lips. The cold concrete beneath her knees suddenly felt like ice. "What do you mean, empty?" Dante closed his eyes, his head lolling slightly to the side. "Roman Navarino, my underboss, the man who just sent 4 cleaners to butcher me in your diner. 3 years ago, Roman was running a massive, off-the-books money laundering operation through the Oak Haven Port Authority. He was skimming from my family, and he was using a junior forensic accountant at the firm we kept on retainer to cook the books." "Lily," Harper breathed, the horrifying puzzle pieces snapping together in her mind. Her sister had been brilliant with numbers. She had just landed a junior partnership at a prestigious downtown firm. "She was smart," Dante continued, his voice growing fainter. "Too smart. She figured out what Roman was doing. She found the offshore routing numbers. She found the digital paper trail. Instead of going to the police, who Roman already owned, she tried to blackmail him. She wanted enough money to pay for your mother's experimental treatments." Harper felt sick, the edges of her vision blurred. Lily had always been fiercely protective. She had always promised she would find a way to save their mother. "Roman didn't negotiate," Dante said bitterly. "He ordered a hit, the hit and run on Blackwood Avenue." "You said the grave was empty," Harper interjected, grabbing Dante's lapels, shaking him slightly to keep him conscious. "If Roman ordered the hit, why is the grave empty?" Dante's eyes snapped open, locking onto hers with a fierce, burning intensity. "Because I got to her first. I intercepted Roman's men. I staged the wreckage. I paid off the medical examiner, Mayor Richard Tremblay, and the responding officers to seal the records. I made Roman believe he had succeeded. I made the whole city believe Lily Quinlan was dead." Harper's mind reeled, threatening to detach completely from reality. She's alive. Lily is alive." "Yes," Dante breathed, a ghost of a grim smile touching his lips. "But Roman found out. Yesterday. He found out she's alive, and he found out she still has the ledger, the digital proof of his treason against my family, and the proof that could put Mayor Tremblay in federal prison for the rest of his life." Dante weakly pointed a trembling finger at the micro SD card in Harper's palm. "That card," Dante gasped, his face turning an even more dangerous shade of grey. "That is the decryption key. Without it, Roman can't access his stolen funds. And he can't erase the evidence. He needs it to survive the war he just started tonight. He shot me to get it. If he gets that card, he will find Lily, and this time he will make sure she doesn't survive." The heavy silence of the pantry was shattered by the sound of distant sirens wailing through the rainy night. They were getting closer. "We have to move," Dante wheezed, his eyes rolling back. "Get me out of here, Harper, or we both die tonight." Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through Harper's shock. Lily was alive. Her sister, the girl she had mourned for over 1,000 agonizing days, was breathing out there somewhere in the world, and the bleeding Mafia boss, slumped against the flour sacks, was the only person who knew where she was. "Don't you dare pass out on me, Castiglione!" Harper barked, her nursing instincts brutally overriding her emotional collapse. She shoved the SD card and the photo deep into her front jeans pocket. She grabbed Dante's left arm, hauling it over her shoulders. "On 3, you are going to use your good leg, and you are going to push. 1, 2, 3. With a synchronized groan of exertion, Harper lifted. Dante, fueled by pure adrenaline and the desperate will to survive, pushed off the concrete with his uninjured left leg. He was massive, his weight crushing her, but they managed to stand. "Back door," Harper grunted, buckling slightly under his bulk. They hobbled out of the pantry, through the dimly lit kitchen. Harper kicked the heavy steel back door open. The storm outside hadn't let up. The freezing rain hit them like tiny needles, instantly soaking through Harper's thin waitress uniform and Dante's ruined suit. The alley was pitch black, save for the weak, amber glow of a distant street lamp. Harper's car, a rusted, barely functional 1998 Honda Civic, was parked next to the industrial dumpsters. "Keys," Harper muttered, fumbling with one hand in her apron pocket while trying to keep Dante upright. She finally fished them out, unlocked the passenger door, and practically shoved Dante into the seat. He collapsed inward with a suppressed cry of agony, his head resting against the fogged glass. Harper sprinted around to the driver's side, threw herself into the seat, and jammed the key into the ignition. The old engine sputtered, coughed, and finally roared to life, sounding more like a dying lawnmower than a getaway vehicle. "Where to?" Harper demanded, throwing the car into drive. She didn't turn on the headlights, keeping the car entirely dark as she navigated the narrow, trash-strewn alleyway. "Oakhaven," Dante slurred from the passenger seat. His hand was resting weakly over the leather tourniquet on his thigh. "Old veterinary clinic. Corner of Elm and 9th. It's an off-the-books safe house. Roman doesn't know about it." Harper slammed on the gas, the tires spinning on the slick, rain-soaked pavement before catching traction. She rocketed out of the alley, instantly blending into the sparse, late-night traffic of the industrial district. The drive was a nightmare of tension. The rain lashed against the windshield, the Civic's failing wiper blades doing little to clear the view. Every pair of headlights in the rearview mirror made Harper's heart slam against her ribs. She was convinced every black SUV was Roman Navarino's hit squad, circling back to finish the job. "Keep pressure on it," Harper ordered, glancing at Dante. Blood was beginning to seep through the heavy leather of her apron tie. The makeshift tourniquet was slipping. Dante didn't respond. His eyes were closed, his breathing terrifyingly shallow. "Dante, keep pressure on the wound," Harper yelled, reaching across the center console and slapping his shoulder. He jolted awake, his eyes wild and disoriented for a moment, before recognizing her. He weakly pressed both hands over his thigh. I'm bleeding out, Harper." "You are not bleeding out in my Honda, Castiglione. The upholstery is already terrible," Harper snapped, trying to inject some levity into the suffocating atmosphere, though her voice shook. "You're tough," Dante murmured, a faint, genuine respect coloring his fading voice. "Lily said you were the strong one. She said, you held the family together when your father left." "Stop talking about her in the past tense," Harper said sharply, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Where is she? If you faked her death, where did you hide her?" "Safe," Dante whispered. "Montreal, under the protection of the Rizzuto family. They owe me a debt. She's been living under the name Sarah Bennett. She writes you letters." Harper hit the brakes hard as a stray dog darted across the wet street. The car skidded, fishtailing slightly before she regained control. "Letters? I never got any letters." "I intercept them," Dante confessed, his voice heavy with guilt. "I have my people collect them from a P.O. box in upstate New York. I couldn't risk mailing them to you. If Roman's men intercepted the mail, if they realized Lily was alive and reaching out to you, they would have tortured you to find her." Tears, hot and furious, suddenly spilled over Harper's eyelashes, mixing with the rain on her face. For 3 years she had visited a gravestone. For 3 years she had drowned in guilt, believing she hadn't protected her little sister. And all this time, Lily was alive, writing to her, and this Mafia boss had been hoarding her words in the dark. "You had no right," Harper choked out, her voice breaking. "You let me mourn her. You let me bury an empty box." "I kept you alive," Dante fired back, a sudden surge of strength entering his voice. "Roman Navarino is a butcher, Harper. He skins his enemies alive. He burns their families in their beds to make a point. If you knew she was alive, you would have looked for her. You would have left a trail. And Roman would have found you both." The harsh truth of his words settled over the small car like a suffocating blanket. Harper knew he was right. She would have torn the earth apart to find Lily. They turned onto Elm Street, the neighborhood plunging into darkness. The streetlights here had been shot out or broken years ago. Oakhaven was a forgotten district, a graveyard of rusted warehouses and abandoned storefronts. "There," Dante pointed weakly. Ahead, nestled between a boarded-up pawn shop and a collapsed parking garage, was a small, unassuming brick building. A faded sign hung above the door, barely legible. "Oakhaven Veterinary Care." Harper pulled the car into the alley beside the clinic, killing the engine. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the drumming of the rain on the roof. "We're here," Harper said, unbuckling her seatbelt. Dante didn't move. Harper looked over. His hands had fallen away from his thigh. The pool of blood on the passenger seat was spreading rapidly. His eyes were closed, his chest barely rising. "Dante?" Harper said, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. She reached over and pressed 2 fingers to his carotid artery. The pulse was there, but it was incredibly faint, fluttering like a dying bird. He had lost too much blood. Harper scrambled out of the car into the pouring rain. She ran to the passenger side, threw the door open, and practically dragged him out. He was completely unresponsive now, a dead weight in her arms. "No, no, no, you don't get to die now," she grunted, hauling him toward the back door of the veterinary clinic. "You have to give me the decryption code. You have to give me my sister." She reached the heavy metal door. It was locked with a heavy-duty keypad. "Dante!" Harper screamed, shaking his unconscious form. "The code! What's the door code?" He didn't answer. The rain washed the blood from his pale face. Harper looked wildly around the dark alley. She was entirely alone, standing in the freezing rain, holding a dying Mafia boss, with the keys to a criminal empire and her sister's life burning a hole in her pocket. And the door to their only sanctuary was locked. The rain showed no mercy, battering Harper's face as she held the dying weight of Dante Castiglione against the cold steel door of the Oakhaven Veterinary Clinic. The keypad glowed with a mocking, faint blue light. 6 digits. 6 numbers stood between Dante's survival and a brutal, unceremonious death in a flooded alleyway. "Think, Harper, think," she muttered frantically, her hands slick with a mixture of freezing rain and warm blood. She patted Dante down, desperately hoping for a wallet, a phone, anything. Nothing. Her mind raced back to the diner, to the few words he had managed to speak before passing out. He had mentioned the micro SD card and the photograph. The photograph. Harper let Dante slide slightly against the brick wall, supporting his chest with her shoulder as she dug her bloody fingers into her wet jeans pocket. She pulled out the torn picture of Lily. It was ruined, the edges soaked, but as she flipped it over under the dim amber street lamp, she noticed faint, faded ink in the corner. It wasn't a date. It was a sequence of numbers, written in Lily's distinct, looping handwriting. 824190. It was the employee ID number Lily had been assigned when she started at the forensic accounting firm, the same firm where she had uncovered Roman Navarino's treason. Dante hadn't just kept the photo to remember a face. He had kept it because it held the master code to his underground sanctuaries. Harper slammed her thumb against the keypad. 824190. A heavy mechanical clack echoed through the alley. The deadbolt retracted. Harper shoved the heavy steel door open with her hip and dragged Dante inside, kicking the door shut behind them. The deadbolt instantly slid back into place, sealing them in absolute darkness. "Hello?" Harper yelled, her voice echoing off tiled walls. "Is anyone here? He's dying!" Fluorescent lights snapped on with a loud hum, blinding her for a second. When her eyes adjusted, she realized she wasn't standing in a veterinary lobby. It was a fully sterile, state-of-the-art trauma bay, hidden behind the facade of an abandoned animal clinic. Stainless steel surgical tables, heart monitors, and glass cabinets filled with medical-grade pharmaceuticals lined the room. From a back office, a man burst through the swinging doors. He was in his late 50s, wearing a wrinkled dress shirt and suspenders, his grey hair wildly disheveled. He took one look at Dante and the blood trailing behind them, and his face drained of colour. "Good God," the man breathed, sprinting toward them. "Get him on the centre table, now!" "Who are you?" Harper demanded, straining as they hoisted Dante onto the stainless steel surface. "Dr. Harrison Keller," he said rapidly, already grabbing trauma shears and violently cutting away the rest of Dante's ruined suit trousers. "I'm his private physician. Who the hell are you? And what happened to his leg?" "Harper, Waitress. He took a bullet to the femoral artery," Harper said, her nursing training kicking in as she moved to the opposite side of the table. "I applied a makeshift windlass tourniquet about 40 minutes ago, but he's lost massive blood volume. He's in severe hypovolemic shock. Heart rate is threadbare." Keller shot her a look of pure astonishment. "You're a waitress?" "I dropped out of nursing school. Tell me what you need," Harper snapped, her hands hovering over Dante's chest. "I need you to scrub in right now," Keller ordered, pointing to a scrub sink in the corner. "The artery is shredded. I have to go in and graft it, or he loses the leg. If he doesn't die of cardiac arrest first, wash your hands, grab the betadine, and prep his groin. I'm getting the O-negative blood bags from the cooler." For the next 2 hours, the hidden clinic became a theatre of desperate survival. Harper shed her soaked, bloody uniform, donning a set of oversized blue scrubs, and worked alongside Keller with a terrifying mechanical precision. She clamped veins, suctioned pooling blood from the surgical cavity, and monitored Dante's crashing vitals while Keller performed a miraculous vascular bypass on the torn artery. It was a nightmare of sweat, copper scents, and the relentless rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Twice, Dante's heart stopped. Twice, Harper climbed onto the table, her knees straddling his waist, performing brutal, rib-cracking chest compressions, while Keller pushed epinephrine directly into the Mafia boss's IV line. By the time Keller tied the final suture, the sun was beginning to rise, casting weak, grey light through the reinforced glass block windows near the ceiling. Harper slumped against the tiled wall, sliding down to the cold floor, utterly spent. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. Dante lay on the table, pale as a ghost, an oxygen mask over his face, but his chest was rising and falling in a steady, independent rhythm. The monitor beeped with a strong, reassuring tempo. "He'll live," Keller whispered, stripping off his bloody gloves and running a hand down his exhausted face. He looked down at Harper. "You saved his life, kid. Most trauma nurses with a decade of experience would have frozen under that kind of pressure. You kept him tethered to the earth." "He has to live," Harper rasped, her throat dry as sandpaper. "He knows where my sister is." Keller's eyes softened with a sudden, heavy realization. "You're Lily's older sister, the one she talked about." Harper looked up, her heart skipping a beat. You knew her too? I treated her, Keller said quietly. 3 years ago, when Dante pulled her from the wreckage of that staged hit-and-run, she had a severe concussion and 3 broken ribs. I kept her here for 2 weeks until she was well enough to be smuggled across the Canadian border. Tears pricked Harper's eyes, a strange mixture of profound relief and bubbling anger. He stole 3 years of my life. He let me grieve. He gave her the rest of hers, Keller corrected gently. Roman Navarino is a monster, Harper. If Dante hadn't done what he did, you and your mother would have been buried right next to her. It was the only way. A low, painful groan from the surgical table interrupted them. Harper scrambled to her feet, rushing to Dante's side. His dark eyes fluttered open, glassy with painkillers but lucid. He pulled the oxygen mask down to his chin, his gaze immediately finding Harper. "You're still here," Dante murmured, his voice a gravelly whisper. "I'm not leaving until I get my sister back," Harper said, gripping the edge of the metal table. Dante offered a faint, grim smile. "Keller, the laptop." Keller nodded, rushing to the back office and returning with a heavy military-grade Panasonic toughbook. He set it on a metal tray table next to Dante. "The card," Dante demanded, looking at Harper. She retrieved the micro SD card from her pocket and handed it to him. With trembling, pale fingers, Dante inserted it into the laptop. A prompt appeared, demanding a decryption key. Dante typed in the 6-digit code from the photograph. The screen flashed green, and lines of data began to spool rapidly across the screen. Bank routing numbers, Shell Corporation registries, and offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Cyprus, and Zurich. "What are we looking at?" Harper asked, staring at the billions of dollars flashing before her eyes. "The execution of Roman Navarino," Dante said coldly. "This isn't just a ledger of what he stole from my family. It's proof that he's been selling Castiglione shipping routes to the Sinaloa cartel to move fentanyl into the city. He broke the Commission's highest law. By dawn, every Mafia family on the eastern seaboard, the FBI, and the DEA will have this file." Dante hit a single keystroke. A progress bar appeared on the screen, indicating a mass encrypted email was sending. "Once that hits 100%, Dante said, his eyes burning with a dark, vengeful fire. "Roman is a dead man walking. He won't have the money to pay his hitmen, and he won't have the political leverage to hide." Suddenly, the heavy steel door at the front of the clinic shuddered violently. A deafening, metallic crash echoed through the room. The progress bar on the screen sat at 42%. "They tracked the car," Keller panicked, backing away from the door. "The Honda! They must have accessed the city's traffic grid." "Roman," Dante growled, attempting to sit up, only to collapse back with a gasp of pain as his freshly sutured artery screamed in protest. "Get down!" Harper screamed, just as the reinforced steel door was blown entirely off its hinges by a shaped C4 charge. The explosion deafened Harper, filling the sterile clinic with thick, acrid grey smoke and pulverized brick. She threw herself to the floor, covering her head, as shrapnel rained down against the medical cabinets, shattering glass in a terrifying symphony of destruction. Through the ringing in her ears and the settling dust, shadows moved into the clinic. 4 men armed with tactical rifles swept into the room, their laser sights cutting through the smoke, and behind them, stepping over the wreckage of the door with an air of absolute arrogance, was Roman Navarino. He was a sharply dressed man in a tailored camel overcoat, his dark hair slicked back, his face a mask of cruel, aristocratic entitlement. He held a suppressed pistol casually in his right hand. "Dante! Dante! Dante!" Roman tisked, his voice smooth and dripping with venom as he surveyed the ruined trauma bay. "Look at you. the great lion of the Castiglione family, gutted on a veterinarian's table. "Roman," Dante spat, his hand inching agonizingly slow beneath the surgical sheet covering his waist. Keller had slipped a small revolver onto the table during the chaos of the explosion, but Dante was too weak to move fast. "Secure the laptop," Roman ordered his men. One of the hitmen lunged forward, but before he could reach the tough book, Dr. Keller raised a 12-gauge shotgun from behind a cabinet and fired. The blast caught the hitman in the chest, throwing him backward into the wall. The response was instantaneous and brutal. The remaining 3 gunmen opened fire. Keller was hit multiple times, his body crumpling to the floor behind the medical supply counter. "No!" Harper screamed from her position on the floor, hidden behind the heavy steel base of the operating table. Roman sighed, stepping over the dead hitman and slowly walking toward Dante. The progress bar on the laptop screen read 81%. "Kill the upload," Roman commanded one of his surviving men. The man stepped forward, but Dante, fueled by pure, unadulterated rage, whipped the small revolver from beneath the sheet and fired twice. He hit the man in the throat and the shoulder, dropping him instantly. But Dante was completely out of strength. The recoil caused the gun to slip from his bloody fingers, clattering uselessly to the floor. Roman chuckled, a dark, humorless sound. He raised his suppressed pistol, aiming it directly at the center of Dante's forehead. "You got old, Dante," Roman sneered. "You got soft. You started caring about civilian girls and waitresses. That's why you're going to die here, and that's why tomorrow I take the head of the table." The laptop screen chimed softly. 95%. Roman's eyes darted to the screen, his face suddenly paling as he realized what was happening. "No," he hissed, raising his gun to shoot the computer. Harper didn't think. The adrenaline in her veins eclipsed every rational thought she possessed. She was entirely unarmed, terrified, and outmatched. But the man on the table was her only path to Lily. From her crouched position behind the table, Harper grabbed a heavy, solid steel IV pole. With a feral scream that tore at her throat, she vaulted upward, swinging the heavy metal base of the pole like a baseball bat directly at Roman's head. The heavy steel connected with a sickening crack against Roman's temple. The underboss stumbled hard to his right, his gun discharging wildly into the ceiling. He crashed into a glass cabinet full of saline bags, screaming in pain and fury. The last surviving hitman whipped his rifle toward Harper. Bang! The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The hitman froze, a perfect crimson circle appearing between his eyes before collapsing to the floor. Harper spun around, her chest heaving. Dante had pushed himself off the table, leaning heavily against it, his surgical wound tearing open and bleeding through the white sheets. He had retrieved a fallen hitman's pistol from the floor. His eyes were cold, lifeless, and entirely focused on Roman. Roman groaned, trying to push himself up from the shattered glass, blood pouring down the side of his face. He reached frantically for his dropped weapon. "It's over, Roman," Dante said, his voice void of any emotion. Ding! The laptop chimed brightly. The screen flashed. "Upload complete. Data distributed." Roman froze, staring at the screen in absolute horror. You just killed us all. The cartel will burn the city to the ground to cover their tracks." "They'll burn you," Dante corrected coldly. "I'm already a ghost." Dante didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger. The bullet struck Roman squarely in the chest, throwing him backward. The traitorous underboss hit the floor and didn't move again. Silence, heavy and absolute, crashed back into the clinic, broken only by the sound of rain pouring through the blown-out doorway. Harper stood frozen, the steel IV pole still gripped tightly in her trembling hands. She stared at the carnage, at the bodies, and finally, at Dante. He dropped the gun, his strength completely failing him, and collapsed back onto the surgical table, his breathing dangerously ragged. Harper dropped the pole. The terror vanished, replaced by the sheer, stubborn will to keep him alive. She rushed back to his side, grabbing gauze from a spilled tray and pressing it fiercely against his bleeding hip. "You don't get to die," Harper yelled, tears freely falling down her cheeks. "The upload finished. You won. Now you owe me a trip to Canada. Do you hear me, Castiglione?" Dante looked up at her, a profound, undeniable respect, and something dangerously close to awe shining in his fading eyes. He lifted a blood-stained hand and weakly gripped hers. "Pack your bags, Waitress," he whispered, before slipping back into unconsciousness. 6 months later, the Montreal air was biting and cold, carrying the scent of pine and impending snow. Harper stood on the balcony of a heavily guarded penthouse overlooking the city skyline, clutching a steaming mug of coffee. Behind the glass doors, the sound of laughter echoed through the opulent living room. Lily was inside, safe, vibrant, and alive, arguing playfully over a game of cards. The destruction of Roman Navarino's empire had violently reshaped the underworld, but the Castiglione family had survived, stronger and more ruthless under their king. Footsteps approached from behind. Dante, walking with a slight, permanent limp and leaning on a silver-tipped cane, stepped onto the balcony. He wrapped a thick wool coat over Harper's shoulders, his presence a heavy, comforting heat against the Canadian chill. The waitress who had kneeled in his blood was gone. In her place stood a woman who understood the shadows, bound to the Mafia boss by a violent, unbreakable loyalty. He kissed the crown of her head, entirely at her mercy. "Ready to go back inside?" he murmured. Harper leaned into him, her gaze fierce. "Always."